Good evening from Rocky Mountain PBSI News. I'm Cynthia Hessen. This is Colorado's State of Mind. It was a week of relative calm in Ferguson, Missouri, following the Monday funeral of the teenage gunshot victim, Michael Brown, whose death, caused by a police officer, touched off wide community reaction in protest. This week, there were a handful of town hall meetings to begin discussing the underlying tensions in a place that has existed for years with racial imbalance in the governing and policing structures. Hendrik Sybrandy is a reporter who I have worked with at Channel 7. He's been several places here in Denver, and he is now the Denver correspondent for CCTV America, based in our newsroom, as a matter of fact. And he has returned from Ferguson just a few days ago. Pretty sure you've never been to that part of Missouri. So what struck you when you got off the plane or started looking around? We
went to the town of Ferguson on Thursday. It's actually a city of 20,000 people. I was struck by how friendly everybody was. Tensions clearly had subsided. At that point, I think we were 11 days into this situation by then, so a lot of the unrest had kind of tapered off by then. But I was also struck by a lot of frustration that people were feeling, a lot of anger that they were feeling. They've been through a lot over the last couple of decades economically, and so I think that sort of formed a backdrop to everything that was going on.
We know what happened to begin with in those first few days was pretty wild, loud, violent protesting and damage. You saw some of that damage, I'm sure.
Oh, clearly. There were a lot of businesses that were boarded up, all up and down the main street in Ferguson, which is called Ferguson Avenue. You could see on both sides of the street, just a lot of damage, a lot of evidence that people had been through there, looting or vandalizing or what have you. There was even, on that first day we were there, on the Thursday, we encountered a barbecue restaurant where they were literally cooking outside because the interior of the restaurant had been devastated and may not be of use for quite some time. So they were actually serving food out in the parking lot and doing pretty good business, actually.
Did you see a police presence on the street once things had calmed down? Did they look like they were just trying to be friendly and ride around in the neighborhoods?
There was a police presence, and everybody seemed to be getting along very well during the day, but it was kind of a tale of two day parts, I guess you could say. There was the daytime when things were pretty mellow in the city, and then after sundown is when any tensions that arose took place. And so at that point, after the sun went down, they would close Ferguson Avenue, or a good chunk of it, prevent people that didn't live in that area from driving through. So it took a different kind of a tenor in the evening as opposed to the daytime. But at least when we were there, people seemed to be getting along. Police were pretty relaxed. They did not have the kind of military-style presence that they'd been criticized for initially. They were not showing that face when we were there.
The funeral on Monday was cause for healing for many people, and the father of Michael Brown had asked that the protests stop for that day.
It was a day of healing. It was a day where a lot of frustrations and feelings were vented, a lot of emotions. The funeral was incredibly well attended. I think estimates of the crowd were something like 5,000 people inside the church, which was packed, and then you had a lot of people outside the church as well. Keep in mind, this was a steamy St. Louis morning. It was an incredible event. I haven't covered a funeral like that before in my life, but you could tell that emotions were still raw, but this was an opportunity for everybody to kind of come together and pay tribute to Michael Brown, Big Mike as he was known in Ferguson, and it was just there was a healing element to it as well.
We talked about how the police were sort of backing down from that presence they had had in the first few days, which has been called just too military a presence. What did you learn while you were there? What were people saying about the equipment they were using and so forth? Well,
they were very unhappy with the way police responded. You had police, standing on Humvees, pointing rifles at some of the protesters. They were not subtle in their approach. Then after the first couple of days, things seemed to taper off a little bit, and then towards the end of the week, police released finally the name of the white police officer, Darren Wilson, I should say. At the same time they did that, they released a videotape of a convenience store robbery that had happened just before Michael Brown was shot. Michael Brown apparently was in that video by all accounts, but the timing of that to many of the people in Ferguson was very distasteful. sort of character assassination of Michael Brown. So the two things juxtaposed towards the end of that week kick things up once again.
Last question, where does the case go now?
The case is now in two venues. It's the grand jury in St. Louis County, which began meeting last Wednesday. They're going to consider evidence for a possible criminal charge against Darren Wilson. At the same time, the U.S. Justice Department is looking at the case. They've got a federal civil rights inquiry going on. That's going on in Washington. So these two things are sort of playing out at the same time, and it may take several months for any kind of decision to be reached, which is frustrating to people who want justice right now.
Thank you very much, Hendrik Sybrandy.